Stand up.
I'm looking for a job. I'm a graduate of the Austin Community College Game Visualization Specialization Program. Programmer. I have worked not in games, in just sort of general business app development for 2 years, but I'm looking to actually use the gaming side of my degree now. So
Alright.
I'm looking for a job that I can get back in the game.
What's your name?
Thomas Inman.
Thank you very much, Thomas.
Hi, my name is Ben Jams. I am a senior game designer, currently freelance, looking for full-time or short to mid-term contracts. I unfortunately don't have any business cards on me. I've been in the industry as a designer for over 15 years now. I have Facebook game experience, mobile game experience, MMO experience, marketing, and a few other things.
Very good. Thanks, Ben.
So I own Underminer Studios. We're actually kind of looking for some contracts. If anybody has any short-term projects that they're looking to get taken care of, VRA or MR, anything in between, can pull together a team pretty quickly. We do really interesting things most of the time. So.
Tell them your name.
Oh, Tim Porter,
Thank you.
Underminer Studios.
Excellent.
Right.
Calyx.
Name's Calyx. I'm a gameplay programmer. I'm for full-time right now. I have experience both in tools when the Switch was still in development, for the Switch, and gameplay programming on multiplayer first-person shooter in Unreal 4. Unfortunately, I can't say the name of it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Thank you. Santi.
I'm Joseph Santi. I just moved back here after finishing college here at St. Edward's for game design. I specialize in writing and audio design, and I also know UE4 and how it operates. I'm looking for a job right now, contract, short-term, part-time, what have you.
Alright.
And I only have one business card, sadly, because I literally moved back last week and I didn't check to make sure I had all of them filled with. So yeah,
So you'll remember this one well.
I will.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if any of you take his card, you have to hire him.
Just pass it around.
Yeah.
Take a picture of it.
My name is Bima. I'm looking for a programmer for a short-term contract. Someone who's familiar with JavaScript, Node.js, and like web development.
Might as well throw this out there. My name is John. I'm a hobbyist game developer. I use mostly Unity and C#. My main programming experience comes from Python and working with data stuff, but I'm wanting to learn more about games and working with games. So if anyone has any projects that just needs hands on deck or internships, things like that, keep my ears open.
All right, great.
Hi, my name is Douglas Lamb. I'm a musician, and I'm basically looking for professional musician work, but also game jam stuff. So if you have a game you're making that you want somebody to do electronic music on, go to douglaslamb.com. It's L-A-M for Mary, B for boy. And I do have cards.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Neat. All the way back here, I'll get you.
Name's Jason Stackhouse. I'm finishing my college degree in December, so looking to get into the game industry. I haven't done anything outside of my own personal projects, mostly game play programming, is what I'm focusing on, kind of away from the art, mostly just the background stuff. So,
Which school?
Focusing in C++, also use C#, some Java, and a bunch of other scripts that everybody uses. So.
Where are you going to school?
DeVry, actually,
Okay.
online. Tried to go to ACC and then they dropped the game
Programming, yeah.
focus, and I was like, no, that's bad. So
It's hard to find programmer teachers.
yeah, so yeah, they're having trouble with that. So I went somewhere that had some game focuses. I was like, I have to be focused. If you just throw me into any computer science, I probably won't care, and I just want to do the gameplay programming. So
Yeah, believe it or not,
I finished that this year. So I'm looking forward to getting a job doing game programming.
is Bruce Naylor still there?
What's that?
Bruce Naylor
Where?
at DeVry. He was an instructor there.
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
The name doesn't sound familiar.
That's all right.
Name's Burns Hollyman, and I want to make you aware of the Texas Film Commission's website. If you're not, there's a ton of video game jobs posted on it right now with
Burns started this meetup, by the way, so
Yeah.
he gifted it to us, without dying, which was kind of awesome.
Well, I gave it to you, and you haven't got rid of me yet, so. Okay, anyone else?
Can I stand up?
Sure.
Okay.
Well,
No,
yeah.
I'm actually asking.
It's his show. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Sean. I work with Tony. We're looking to talk to programmers. My back pocket is full of cards. So, talk to he or I when this is done. Thank you,
Yeah,
Sean.
we'll hear about his employer in just a bit. Okay, so a couple news items, just so people know about it. Last time I talked about how there had been like 8 games come out of Austin since mid-April. There's one more coming out that I'm aware of, Avon Colony, which is by Mothership Games, which is headed up by one of the lead programmers for Metroid Prime 2 and 3. It's a space colony simulator, and it'll be out on the 25th, I believe. There's also a couple events going on, and it's been in front of me this whole time if you're not looking at this, although I put in a hashtag when it really should be an @sign. That's a Twitter account, and if you don't like Twitter, it points to a Facebook account, and they both point to a Google Calendar, so you have no excuse to not know what's going on in Austin, at least on a weekly basis. The stuff that's immediately, off the top of my head, tomorrow night is a game to Beer Night, which I run twice a month at 2 different bars. The one we're doing tomorrow is at Mr. Tramp's up on North 183. And then later this month on, I believe the 26th, the last Wednesday of the month, whatever day that is the Austin VR meetup. And a lot of people, I have been checking in to see why you joined this particular group, and a lot of people are interested in VR, AR, as is everyone. So if you want to find some more people specifically on that, definitely go to that meetup, which is at VUCA North Lamar. It's just south of the Koenig Road intersection, across the street from the big half-price books.
Finn, stand up and talk about it.
Yeah, sure.
As if we could stop you.
Yeah.
I'm the founder of Chicken Waffle. It's a virtual reality development studio here in Austin. We're also hiring programmers and designers. I was a little late. So
Yeah, you're a little late.
Me
That's
too.
fine.
I'm hiring, but we are hiring. We're looking for talented, more artists and animators as well, programmers and designers. If you aren't afraid of programming,
Yes.
the best designers are scripters, and the best scripters don't mind design, I found. We also are involved with the VR scene. A lot of stuff coming up. We just announced actually next week on Thursday, so a week from today, down on the first floor, we're doing a big workshop with Editor VR, with the Unity Editor VR, so you can like design in VR, non-run time, so you can like kind of gray box your stuff out around you, which is really awesome. So we're gonna be talking about how to use that and how to customize your own tools, as well as on the 3rd, I guess, is the next Austin Unity meetup group, which I also organize, and that one's gonna be focused on the new Apple AR kit and the new features of Unity 2017.1. So we're gonna have somebody from Unity that we're gonna be talking about some of our things that we're doing with Chicken Waffle on the AR kit for Apple as well, and so lots of cool stuff to show off, and so I hope to see you all there.
Thank you, Finn. All right, well, Gordon and I are pretty good about showcasing what kind of show we're going to put out, but please keep in mind when you come back to these, this will always have a networking component to this, so now you know to bring business cards and come ready. So with all that, I'm going to go over there and get a drink.
Awesome. I'm Gordon Walton. I'm the gratuitous old game guy for Austin at this
Not that
point.
old.
So there's a couple other gratuitous old game guys too. Some of them are more well preserved than I am, Dr. Cal. Tonight we're going to talk about going out on your own and building a contracting business. And I'm going to let each of the panelists kind of introduce themselves, and then we're going to ask a few questions to see if we can tease some stuff out of them. But the main thing is this is a conversation, so don't be afraid to raise your hand and go, hey, wait a minute, what the hell? And ask your questions, because these guys know a lot about this, because they've already suffered through the slings and arrows. And we'll just start on this side and move our way across.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cat. I've been making games for a living for 35 years now. And my partner and I were the first ones to quit Origin Systems to start a new game company before it became a fad.
A trend leader.
Yeah, we've got the world record for the longest continuously running MMORPG. And these days I've been doing full-time contract work through Mobile Game Doctor, which is run by a friend of mine out in California. That's
Go,
it.
Jason.
I'm Jason Hughes. I've been doing games here in Austin for 22 years, and I started at Origin well after the fad had begun, people leaving and starting their own. What should I say? I started a contract business after being in the games industry for about 10 years, and I ran that successfully, sort of, for a while, about 7 years, and then at some point I was acquired by Zynga for talent. So they didn't care about any of the products we built, they only cared about the team. And so my perspective on contracting is kind of a little different than maybe the rest of the people here, because they're all building their teams right now, or have their teams and they're working. I got lucky and I had an exit. So hopefully I'll get
But it
some
didn't
other
stick.
details. Well, it did actually. It stuck for everyone but me. The rest of my team is still at Zynga and they're all relatively happy. But the entrepreneurial spirit is hard to kill.
Yeah, but if you're not working at home, then I would debate the use of the word lucky. So there's downsides. We could talk about the downsides.
Yeah, we should.
We will.
I'm Tony Bratton. I run 22nd Century Toys here in Austin. We do contract development for game teams that runs the gamut from custom engineering for deep C++ system level stuff to bringing Unity games and other and indie games over onto the consoles. I've been in the industry, I think, 26 years. I was a latecomer to the Origin diaspora as well, but managed to stick with Origin and EA, Microsoft, Disney, all by staying here in Austin. So I consider myself pretty lucky, and have come to the entrepreneur clan a little bit late in life. Never intended to be there, so it's been quite a learning curve. We can talk about that in a little while.
Hi, I'm Tess, and I never worked at Origin. I'm the co-owner of Hidden Achievement. We do contracting for all kinds of things. Like, we've done everything from like software that runs inside a teddy bear to we do mobile porting. We've done accessory apps for board games. We just all kinds of stuff. We also do some in-house stuff. Like, I'm currently working on the Dresden Files cooperative card game under license with Evil Hat and Jim Butcher. But anyway, we're all over the place on that stuff because take money where you can get it, right? And so but historically, I've been programming professionally for probably about 2 decades. And but I've been programming games since I was a kid. I started working in games professionally over a decade ago, and we've been doing the contracting thing for probably, I want to say, about 7 years. My bio probably says. I don't remember numbers very well. That's the computer's job.
So we got a little bit of, what kicked you into contracting, but, can each one of you kind of go back and talk about that story of the day you woke up and you went, oh yeah, I want to be a contractor, or shit, I can't do anything else, I have to be a contractor. and so I'll start with Tess.
When I was a little kid, I thought the most horrifying thing I could possibly end up doing is working 9 to 5 in an office. And on some level, I think I've always sort of felt that way. Like, that feeling never really went away. And so it wasn't my thing. It wasn't what I wanted to do with my life. And so I think I always wanted to do what we're doing now. And was really planning for it. I mean, when I went to work for Tryon years ago, they offered me a job in California or a job in Austin, and I was like, well, I'm going to go to Austin because it's going to be cheaper for me to contract there someday than it is for me to do that in the Bay Area. And so I was definitely already planning ahead for this back then, and yeah, it just seemed like the obvious trajectory of my life. When I left there, I was like, yep, it's time. I'm going to do it now.
So you were ready.
Yeah, I was ready.
Overready.
For me, it was, I'd seen so many friends leave a company and go, okay, I'm going to put everything I have into this great game idea. And then really push for that. And then ultimately go, oh, hey, we're running out of money. I think I need to go pick up some contract jobs to fund this thing that I'm doing. And at the time, Junction Point closed. We didn't have any really great game ideas. The whole
business model was kind of was really changing, the console and mobile and all this. I thought, you know what, why don't we just flip that on its head and say, let's just start off with the contract stuff. And that gets us exposure to lots of different projects over a short period of time. We get to work with a lot of different people. We get to get our finger on the pulse of what's going on and build a team at the same time. And so when the right alignment of idea and team and funding all built off the back of the contract work occurred, we'd be ready to jump on it. Now, 4 years down the road, it's actually pretty fun to continue on with the contract stuff. And while we have a backlog of ideas that we keep saying, yeah, one day we'll get to that, right now we have interesting clients and fun projects to work on and plenty of work. And the alignment hasn't happened yet, but it's a lot more fun than I thought it would be.
Yeah, that alignment will almost never happen because there's always paying customers.
Yeah.
That's something I learned. What I did is I was working at Naughty Dog on PlayStation 3 Guts, and I was tired of working for a living, getting paid for the hours I was giving up, and I had saved enough that I could come back to Austin. And I told myself I was going to give myself a year, and I came back, started a company, and started working on my own game. It was a project on the Wii. There were no engines for the Wii, which meant I had to start from scratch. And I built everything from scratch. In that 8 months, 0 to 60 as fast as I could go. Hired 2 other people. And we built the very simplest game we could possibly put together. Launched it on WiiWare and watched it flounder. And at that moment, I realized that the runway had completely run out. And there was absolutely nothing else I could do but work for money. Again, it's, you know, trading my hours for someone else's projects, whatever they needed. And I was fine with that because it had sunk in that the games industry is a really, really tough business. And there's nothing harder than trying to create something new. And at the point where your project is out there and it didn't resonate with the market, there's this huge empty pit in your stomach that can't be filled. It's something where you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you go do whatever it is that it takes to put money back in the bank and look for that next shot. And over the next several years, we tried 2 more times. So, but it was at times we had 4 or 5 concurrent projects from different clients while we were still working on our own projects. And I can't remember sleeping through about 8 years of my life, but it was one of those things where the different technologies that we ran into, the different people we worked with, the different networks that we created, just at various points, when somebody needed a contract programmer, they'd call me first knowing that I was fully booked, but I knew who else was available and I'd send them somewhere else. And that's the kind of network that you build because you want them to call you first because you get best dibs. It's like, oh, that's a project I want. Oh, I don't care about that. I'll send you to someone else. At least you have that choice, right? So get to know everybody.
Well, and the clients appreciate it too if you don't leave them holding the bag there, right? If you can send them to somebody quality, because I think we sent you some work
Yeah,
that we
yeah.
just were just too familiar.
Totally did.
Yeah.
That was great.
All right.
So I've gone back and forth between freelance and being an employee probably more times than I care to count. There's things I like about both of them, but you know, being a cat, I don't like other people telling me what to do, which is why I prefer to run my own show, whether as a, you know, an individual consultant or running my own small team. I started out in '82 by making an entire game all by myself, because that's what you did, with no help from anyone, and I sent it to a couple publishers, and one of them took it. But then, like 1984, after I left my second salary job, I went to a store and I found every box that had an address on it. I found as many game company addresses as I could, and I sent a resume to all of them. I thought, this is 1984. I already have, like, you know, 3 or 4 published games under my belt, which not many people do. I should get a good reaction. One company wrote me back and said, well, we don't have any in-house development staff. We just publish products people make and send us. And the entire rest of the industry just responded with a deafening silence. Nobody else wrote me back. You know, that was my first exposure to the fact when companies want to say yes, either on a hiring or publishing your product decision, they will get back to you. If the answer is no, they're too busy to bother even telling you no. I remember one producer who told me no and gave me some feedback on why. I'm like, this is such a great guy. But, you know, more recently, I spent a few years at a mobile game company run by a semi-legendary asshole entrepreneur. And, you know, I always thought, you know, I spent a lot of my career making rich white people richer, which is the other reason I prefer to be independent. The next time I have a hit, you know, hopefully, although I just put out one I contracted for somebody else, and I'm not getting a royalty, but that's okay. They're a great guy and they pay me well. But the next hit I have, I want to be owning a piece of, and certainly, you know, I own the majority of Arcadia, and that did well for a number of years, and gave me you know, a level of independence and freedom to do whatever I wanted next that you just generally don't get at working at someone else's company. So the guy I was working with, he spun off a new company. I joined him as the second person. He swore he'd get, you know, investment funding for this terrible idea within a couple months, and he didn't. So when I finally left, just as I was starting to look around, my buddy Dave, this is my number one recommendation if you want to be a consultant or a contractor, know Dave Rorrell and be his friend. He said, let me try and seduce you into full-time consulting like I do. I have enough game design consulting work, which is my favorite. You know, I do coding and other stuff, but I love game design. Let me give you some of the stuff I'm too busy to handle. And he's kept me busy for the last year now, and paid well, and, you know, working at home, and the hours aren't too stressful. I've been flown up to Canada several times. Have an up-to-date passport too. I missed a potential client because I wasn't ready to fly out to Russia. Yeah, you know, what's worked for me, A, having the experience that people say, yeah, this guy will do a good job, but B, having somebody who will find the contacts for me. As much as I have contacts of my own from decades in the industry, and I've found my own projects and negotiate deals, Dave is just better at it than I am. And, you know, a lot of artists and creative people aren't good at the business skills that it takes to do something like this. So if you aren't, either A, you know, grit your teeth, get some books, go to the Small Business Administration, learn this stuff, or B, find somebody like Dave. I can't speak more highly of having somebody else solve your problems for you.
All right, so I got three things out of this. One is, everybody here is not a recovering gameaholic, of some game maker-aholic of one type or another. Everyone's, you know, got issues that they still want to be making games. The second thing I take away from this is, from your comment, so today, if you send out 100 resumes, nobody will talk to you either. They won't tell you no. So nothing has changed in a whole bunch of years. Anybody out there have that experience where you send out a bunch of resumes and they get shit back? Okay, there you go.
I will say though, by the time you can start saying 30 years experience, people go to the trouble to talk to you and maybe interview you before they say no. So it's slightly improved.
Well,
So
they don't want to piss you off. Your network's big enough now. And the third thing is, you know, over and over again, right? It's about your network of people that you know that can refer you business, or that you can refer business to, is really, really important. So knowing people in the game business is really key, and keeping those relationships semi-fresh, which is so easy with Facebook or one of these other shit things that we hate. You know, but nonetheless, I mean, that's the problem, right? They make it easy to feel like you're still in touch with somebody, which is really hard pre-Facebook. You'd have to go to the GDC, maybe see them once, you know, when the GDC was small enough to see everybody, but now it's too big to see everybody. So it's a real issue. So I'm a person of extremes at heart. So what I'd like to hear is, for you personally, what's the worst about what you do, and what's the most awesome part? And I'll start with you, Dr. Cat. Only the extremes. I'm not interested in that warm.
You know,
middle center.
I already mentioned Gerard, and I'm still kind of recovering from years of that. I mean, I worked harder than I ever did. I got a lot done, but I said, this is where I go to get insulted and get rich, and I got 1 out of 2 out of those. But yeah, I want to go back to like some contract work I did. I was doing a simultaneous port of a Mac Windows game. I was delivering the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation version. And boy, you know, the PlayStation development kit and their support was like a dream. It was really good. And the Saturn stuff, I found out Sega would develop a new platform, and then immediately the people who worked on the hardware would get hired by some of the top console video game companies. Oh, you know the graphics chips and everything really well. And so they'd have nobody there. You know, I had a really thorny problem, and I'm talking to this guy on the phone, and about 5 minutes into it, I'm like, you know, I really don't know a lot about the graphics hardware, but I feel pretty strongly I know more than this guy. You know, the CEO I was working for there was buddies with Iguana, and he hooked me up with someone in Iguana that answered my question. But the real nightmare of it, there was like Time Warner Interactive, because of Atari, Time Warner, and Warner Brothers. You know, this big corporate entity kind of owned 3 game companies at the time and hadn't figured out what to do about consolidating them or shedding the worst ones yet. And they were contracting to this guy whose claim to fame was he had like been producer on the Mac version of Tetris. And he had done a puzzle game called Heaven and Earth that did just kind of so-so. And he was convinced his next puzzle game was going to change the world for the better. It was not only going to make untold millions of dollars for him, but he was partnered with a Nigerian drummer and spiritual guide, and they put subliminal messages in there that flashed up, you know, for like 1/60th of a second, and he thought, oh yeah, subliminals work, and all this affirmation is going to make people have. It was a great screensaver. You know, it was a terrible game. If they had taken the gameplay out of it, it would have been a much better product. But they were contracting to these guys, Cinematronics, who, great people, some of the best I ever worked for. They apparently didn't know there was an arcade game company in the 80s called Cinematronics, so they accidentally reused the name. They later sold their company to Maxis, and you know, I'm glad they had a good exit. They were great guys. I loved working for them, but the designers out in Hawaii that had created this game, I remember being on the phone, and I had put in a fancy font and a cool-looking new menu for the consoles that, you know, Mac just had a drop-down menu. I had a really pretty menu of, like, you know, settings, play, whatever. And my partner did some art for them that they never bothered to compensate her for, you know, on spec, and I was a little bummed about that. But there was this phone call from Hawaii. I had done a burn on the machine you made test CDs with, and we had sent it out to them, or maybe sent them an image. They had a burner. They're looking at the menu, and they're like wanting to change the colors again for the 8th time, but this time they're on the phone. So I'm like, I'm finally going to get final color choices from these assholes so we can move on. And, you know, the Cinematronics guys are like, oh please hit the milestones and release this thing before Time Warner realizes this game is a turkey and cancels the whole project and doesn't pay us the rest of the money, which is what happened because of these crazy guys in Hawaii. Here's the 2 people, you know, and their producer in Chicago was on the phone just listening in, and as much dismay as me, as the Nigerian guy and the producer guy are arguing about whether this purple should be more bluish or more reddish. And I'm like, how am I going to get a final color when these guys absolutely cannot decide? And it's just so trivially unimportant, really, as compared to just getting the fucking game done and shipped, which, again, you know, I got paid a lot of money. I got, you know, 10 out of 12 milestones, and the game never shipped on those platforms because, you know, Time Warner people came back from the holidays and said, oh, it's time to cancel this now. You know, we could have been out months earlier. So yeah, that was, it's a crazy, it's crazy sometimes.
All right. Best and worst.
Best and worst.
The high and the low.
Oh, you wanted best too? Worst is so much more fun.
The best was in there somewhere. Do you still have a best?
Oh no. Let's move on. I ate up enough time already.
Let's see. The best. The best was probably I had not slept in 3 or 4 days. I was on the phone with one of the guys at 2K Games. They were doing a bunch of great stuff, And he's like, we need some technology that's going to make it so that people can't steal our games. So
What year is this?
this was 2010.
Okay.
The line hadn't come out yet, so it was, they had a couple of games, Darksiders 2, I think, and a few others, or Darkness 2, I can't remember. So anyway, they had me build something for them, made them several versions for each of the different consoles that they were working on, PC as well, and built a back-end server, all the PHP and the databases and all the stuff that they needed done. And I built it for them in about 3 weeks. And they were kind of floored. This is while I was juggling 2 other projects and working on site with you.
Shit.
So this was spare time. I built him all this stuff, and then he's like, okay, great, now you have to come and integrate it for us. And then I had to get a passport because they flew me to London, Ontario, Canada, to Berlin, to San Francisco, and 2 or 3 other places. And it was awesome. I got to I think Boston was one of them. I got to spend all this time going places I'd never been before, and it was an hour to 2 hours, me sitting there telling a programmer where to type. It's like, yeah, type this in. Here's the library. Oh yeah, I did it in such a nice, clean, easy way that there's no memory allocations at all. You just add the library to your build, link it in, call this function, you're done. They loved me. And they were like, yeah, this is fantastic. And so I made friends in every studio that 2K had internally and some other third party. And every one of them was like, awesome, you want any contract work? I'm like, I can't technically give you my card. I just can't. But call me. Here's my number. So that was the best. The worst was probably not having any money whatsoever in the very beginning. And a guy I didn't know who was an absolutely nice guy, total swindler, comes up to me and says, I've got a project for you. It needs to be put onto the Wii. You just did a Wii project. You have some existing code. And we've got lots of money. We're totally going to give you lots of money for this. And I said, okay, well, what's the project? And he tells me about it. And it's a PC game, old PC game. Oh, it's evergreen. It's going to make lots of money. We'll cut you in for a percentage. And he tells me all about it. I look at it. I'm like, okay, we can make it work. He had a mobile developer who was already failing miserably trying to do this thing with the software rasterizer. I found a way to make it all fit in RAM. The whole thing ran perfectly. It took us about 2.5 months, myself and my business partner. And I never got anything in writing.
Early lesson.
Yes. So the total amount of money that I got paid for that was under 30 grand for the whole port process. It was, and it had the frickin' Wii balance board, which if you've never worked on that, I add 10,000 to every bid after that game just for that piece of shit. So yeah, we did a bang up job for them, and we got paid just chicken feed, no percentage in the back end, and it didn't sell. I mean, it was the first and only packaged good I've ever done. That was a port that I actually got my company's name on, which was nice. As a contractor, you're never mentioned, never ever mentioned.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, the publisher will actually get their name on the box, and they might mention you in the credits or something. And we didn't have to argue over that too much because we did them a big favor.
We're session musicians, basically.
Yeah, we're the invisible help. That's it.
Very cool.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Jason, your best, is that portcullis?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Did you use that?
Yeah.
I've seen it, yes.
Mm.
Yes, I used it, yes.
Does it still work?
It still works.
Do you know the backdoor password?
We code around it.
Yeah,
There's no backdoor.
yeah.
Best and worst. I think the best is that, we've been doing this a long time, and left to our own devices will just be grumpy dudes sitting in a room grumping to each other. I'm talking about you,
Yeah.
Sean. So working, like the work we do with the indies, I think is really the most rewarding part. Is we get to see new, we've been really lucky. The games that we've worked on have been really fresh, fun games. The scope has been really short, so you don't feel like you're trudging through it.
The teams have responded really well to our feedback, so we really feel like we're part of the team. So it's kind of like being part of a cool new project on this regular beat going forward. And I think that's been great, fantastic. It's hard really for me to identify some bad times. I think when we first started getting into the swing of sales, right, when you have that first big contract. It was a big contract. It was internal engine development, hoisting some stuff out of one company's engine into a standalone library, and it had all this runway on it. But the thing is, every single contract with these big developers or big clients, they can terminate at any time for any reason. And so we thought we had months of runway left on this project, and one day, kind of without any hint at all, it's like, okay, well, we're really happy with your work. You guys are the best people we work with.
But we changed our mind.
We're done. Yeah, there's internally, we're not doing this, or we're going to do something else. And luckily, we had already lined up one project going forward, but we hadn't fully tasked everybody, and so we were able to shuffle some things around and then go fishing for another project. That was tough, because I wasn't sure if that was about 1 year in. I wasn't sure if we were going to survive that. And the network came to the rescue there, where a former member of the studio landed at a big studio. They needed some work. They needed, actually it was 2K. They needed GameSpy died, and Borderlands didn't work anymore on the PlayStation 3, and they needed somebody to fix that. Actually, PlayStation 3 and the PC. So we surgically went in and got rid of GameSpy and replaced it with Steam and the PSN support. And there was some real ninja work, and it was a product that no one had touched in a long time, and it required learning build systems and all the stuff that had been built on Unreal, and it was really gnarly and dirty, but we kicked its butt, and that steamrolled into a whole bunch of other things. So then we turned what was a dark day into something that really got us into a groove, because based off of that, we got the success of that, we got more business and more business and more business. The publicity for that led to cold calls, people coming in and saying, hey, I saw you in this press release. Do you have time for this thing that we want to do? Like, of course, let's do that. So I think that's the important lesson there is, like, be the best people that your clients have ever hired. I mean, we want to be like Jason did work for us on Epic Mickey, and we're like, let's be like Jason. So if you do that, the work will come, and that solves the sales problem, because sales is tough if you're not an extrovert sales type person.
If you don't have a big network to start with, it's a real challenge.
So the worst thing for me is that when I'm working on a contract, I feel guilty and stressful over not working on the internal projects. And when I'm working on an internal project, I feel guilty and stressful that I'm not making immediate money for the company. So I kind of can't win there. I'm just always feeling kind of guilty and stressful, and so there's this tension going on all the time over that. But the best thing is I get to do so many different kinds of things. I get to learn all kinds of new technologies, and I tell people all the time, programming is a lifetime of learning, and I get to do all that learning all the time. I don't get stuck in a rut at a AAA company working on camera code for 3 years. I'm just doing all kinds of new things and staying fresh and being on top of stuff and getting to work on lots of different kinds of games and technologies, and that's super fun for me. But it actually also helps me with my internal projects, because there will be those times you're working on an internal project and you hit a tedious part of it, because you can't, I don't have enough people to pass all that off to. Programming, and I have some employees, but they're junior folks mostly. So I'm like, that's gonna be too hard for somebody else to do. So, but I'll get in the mud on something. I'll be like, this is gonna take me 2 weeks to do, and I'm really bored with it. And I could say, okay, I'm going to work on this contract for a while. So I go over and work on the contract for a while, for maybe a week. And then after that, I so want to work on my project again. I'm like, I really want to work on my thing. I really want to work on that thing. And again, it's the downside. I'm feeling that guilt and stress. I'm like, I need to work on my thing. I need to work on my thing. And so when I get back there, I'm like, I'm just gonna get this thing done, and I marathon through the thing that was gonna take 2 weeks in like the next 24 hours, and I'm done with it. I just, bang it out, because I've got all that motivation after working on the other things. So switching projects for me is a really positive thing. It gets me really energized, and that's a really great part of contracting for me because I'm not stuck in a rut.
Well, some of that is you just spent some time away from it, which means in your background process was already working on it.
Absolutely, your
So
subconscious
you
keeps
actually
chewing on
already
that
figured it all out. All the stuff you knew you were going to suffer on, you were suffering on it just in background.
That's why sometimes when you go to sleep and then wake up again, you're like, oh, I totally know how to fix that thing I was stuck on last night.
So I was expecting, I'll tell you, here's what I was expecting. I've done contracting work too. To me, the hard piece, the most difficult problem is prospecting for the right kind of work that you can get in and get out of, right? So that you don't want the tar baby projects. You want the ones that the customer thinks is a tar baby, but you know you can nail, right? Like, the stuff like, oh yeah, GameSpy died. Okay, internally nobody wanted to do that because it was a no-win situation, right? And so, and if you feel like you can do it, then it's win-win-win for everybody. But the second biggest part is always how do you make sure you get paid? Because there's a lot of frickin' scumbags out there who will pay for a product all day long, but will not pay for a service if they can find a way to weasel out of it. So any stories about figuring out how to make sure you don't get those kind of clients, or what you do, what you had to do when you got one of those kind of clients? Because that's a scary thing for a lot of people. A lot of people have a hard time asking for their money, right, if they haven't done that before. So anything that you can share, I think, would help the audience as they think about, because the fear of this is, I've got to run my own business, and not only that, I got to be my own marketing person, and I got to be my own bill collector.
So I actually have something on that. When I mentioned one of the worst things, that wasn't the worst thing, but the worst thing was also something that I kind of suspected was going to happen. I had, and networking is so critical. Don't let me scare you off of this. I had a friend who he was starting his own business. He had done concept artwork for so many different hidden object games on PC. The biggest ones, 6 years ago, all had his company, or he was working for those companies and doing it all remotely, contract work and whatnot. And he's like, I don't need to keep doing this remotely. I can just start my own business. I know the other 2 or 3 guys that did this work. We'll leave, we'll start our own company, and they'll start making their own hidden object games. And they shopped around, found a publisher. Publisher was like, yeah, we'll do it. You know that we actually send all these projects to Romania, so we'll do the whole project for $120,000. And his jaw hit the floor. He's like, you do what? $120,000 isn't enough to pay people for the amount of effort required. And they said, well, you still haven't proven you can do the work. So I had a junior developer, and I said, I'll help you snag the deal. You guys need to seal it by actually doing the art and getting the project and everything. And my junior guy did a really good job building a prototype for him. We've never built a hidden object game before. But we knocked something out for him in a month or so, completely pro bono. And as soon as he took that prototype to them and said, look, we can do it, we've done this kind of work before, they signed the deal, and then he hired a different developer to do the work and never paid us. And whenever that started going sideways, because he hired a non-game developer, anybody will do game work for nothing because they think that it's the best, right? And it is, but it's not something most developers can do. Just because you know how to program doesn't mean you can do games. It's actually really, really hard. And this guy didn't know what he was doing, botched it badly. And then my buddy came back to me and said, hey, can I borrow you guys for a couple of months? I said, no. I wish I could help you, buddy, but there's no money in it. You didn't pay me for the last month you used. I can only give so much. So, I let out enough rope that it did hang me, but I can absorb a month here if I have to. But when somebody comes to the well multiple times, you have to cut them off. And no bad blood. He's still a friend of mine, and I don't mention it, but I remember it. So.
We tend to be really hard ass about getting paper before we will write a line of code for anybody. and we make it clear that we have a lawyer that's looking at the paper, because if they know up front you have a lawyer, they're going to be less inclined to mess with you. But if you have a contract where like the contract is just going back and forth because their lawyer keeps trying to sneak stuff in there, walk away. Just get away from it. That's going to be a bad client. Even if you finally hash things out with them, they're still going to be a bad client because they're just trying to squeeze in any little thing they can. They're trying to rules lawyer you. They're trying to, they're just going to be problems. And related to what he was saying, we haven't had problems with not getting paid. We've had problems with clients ghosting on us. They'll just stop talking to us out of the blue, and we're like, what is going on here? We have a milestone coming up. We need you to tell us what you need for this milestone, and you're not saying anything, and we can't do the work if you don't tell us what you're going, what you need for this milestone. And they're not saying anything to us, and it's like, what's going on? And every single time, it's exactly that thing. They've brought somebody else on board to do the work. Every single time, it's for one of two reasons. Either, oh, we're going to bring this junior person on who's going to be cheaper, and they're going to get it done in the same amount of time. Ha ha ha. or oh, this person said they can get it done faster. Ha ha ha. They're always wrong. They're always, always, always wrong. But they stop talking to you. You know why they stop talking to you? Because they feel guilty. They feel guilty, and they feel embarrassed that they made this decision, so they already know they did something wrong. But they're not talking to you, so you can't tell them they did something wrong. They clearly don't want your advice on this matter. And so what you really need to do in that case, if you ever run into a client that's doing that, is if you know anybody else at the company, if you have contact with anybody else there, like maybe one of the other programmers or something like that, ask them what's going on, because the execs aren't talking to you. So, it's like, hey, what's happening? And they'll be like, oh, we brought on this junior guy. And I'm like, good luck with that, guys. Bye. You guys botched this contract. We didn't. But yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating when they do that, because you may have other opportunities coming in. You've got other people saying, hey, we need some work done. And you're like, but I have this contract. So you need to find out quickly. You need to get that other person at the company to tell you what's going on, so you can safely extract yourself from that contract and not be responsible for the disaster they're about to create.
Yeah,
Well, the smaller you are, the harder it is to kind of overbook yourself too.
Yeah.
It's funny, I hear that story, and I'd say, most of the time it goes exactly as you say, but I have to smile a little because I was that guy. And it was exactly the other way around. That's how I got my job at Origin.
Oh, that's funny.
The vice president of Penguin had left to go be VP of product development at Origin. They had a bad contractor porting a game from the Apple to the Commodore 64. Because
Right.
all their coders loved the Apple, but the general public loved the Commodore 64. So I was this guy, like, I don't pick my platform. The public picks my platform for me by voting with their numbers. 10 million of them bought the Commodore, fine, I'm getting a Commodore. So Dave tells him, look, Softmates doesn't look like they're going to deliver in time for Christmas. And they were giving bullshit excuses. Yeah, we don't have this milestone, but we have it mostly done. We just haven't sent it to you to look at. And Dave's like, I don't think they're going to deliver. And let's pay a second guy to do it. And then if either of them finishes it, we'll have the product for Christmas. And if it turns out Dr. Cat gets it done and Softmates doesn't, you'll be glad that we risked a little bit of money for 3 months' work, which is exactly how it turned out. And then they said, wow, you did great on this 3-month port. Can we hire you full time? And I was there 5 more years. So,
Well,
yeah, I don't want to, again, your story's more typical. This is an anomaly.
Well,
but,
obviously, don't be the bad contractor that he's replaced.
Yeah.
that he replaced.
No, I would say, in my experience, the best thing is, first best thing is work for someone you've worked for before and they pay. Second best thing, work for someone that, friends and coworkers of you have dealt with, and they can tell you, yeah, this guy's above board, he always pays what he says. And if you don't know somebody that's worked for them, ask around through contacts, see if you can find another developer that's done contract work for a new company you're considering, and just kind of check them out a little. There's a lot of places that do pay their bills. I've been lucky in 35 years. I've had one person that didn't pay me everything they agreed to, and that was my asshole CEO. He paid me on time for 2 years, very reliably and consistently. And then he started a new company with his own money, and he didn't get the VC coming in, so he was still spending his own money. And, you know, I'm of Jewish descent, but he's a Scotsman, which I guess can maybe be even more dangerous. And I got to the point where I would just routinely threaten him and say, I'm not coming in on Monday unless you pay me my last invoice that's overdue. And he'd give me all kinds of hell. You shouldn't be having to do, you could try that. I'm like, yeah, you know, he can say that, but I'm going to make that threat again a few weeks from now if I need to, and I did. And I finally timed my exit. I'm like, okay, I'm never going to leave here without him owing me a penny, including that one from like 4 or 5 months ago at the last company he never paid. I'm going to try and get it to where it's some fraction of my latest 2-week invoice period that he owes me and nothing more for the new company, and that'll be the best time to leave. You know, let me try and minimize how much I'm out, and I'm keeping my MacBook. You know, I'm not going in for the last day he wants me in. He'll ask for the thing back. I'd have to argue. I'm just going to not show up on Friday and you know, stay home with the MacBook, and that accounted for a portion of what he owed me anyway. So, but yeah, you know, reputations get around. If somebody's been not paying, there's people that know it, and you can find out. So, you know, check them out, and you can usually find out whether they're reliable.
Network. I'm glad I'm seeing questions. Go.
Well, it's like kind of an experience that we've had on the other side of the table. We use about 90% of our programmers are from contracts, and so we're really transparent with the people that we work with, to the point of like, I feel bad when I have to say, well, hey, this is about the end of the rope here and stuff like that, and I appreciate everything that's been going on. And,
Speak up for the speakers.
so we've been really transparent with our developers, and one of the things that I've found is a terrific courtesy that very few contractors have given to us is that little bit of the escape hatch. It's like, hey, I totally get it. If this is like outside of your budget, just let me know. And that's like, all the pressure's off me. It's like, okay, he's already communicating with me in that area. So that the communication isn't just one way, it's 2 ways. And we found that we work a lot of repeat business with the fellows that provide that 2-way communication.
So one of the developers I worked with a lot here in town was a company called Red Fly Studio, and great guys. I worked with them a little bit at Retro Studios before, and when they heard I was available and looking for work, they brought me in, and I did a little work for them, and then did more work for them, and led a project for them, then did some more work for them. So over the span of about 4 or 5 years, I shipped everything that they had. Like, I did something in every one of their products. And there was a point where they got screwed really badly by Namco. And it was just one of those situations where they had, everything was forecast, they had all of their cash payments were set up, they knew they had the right number of people on staff to do all the projects. They had ink on a contract, and then Namco just tore it up. Said, we're not gonna start this project, even though you've got it in your hand, you can take us to court, but you'll be out of business before it matters. And that shit happens. Publishers can be pretty ruthless. And so they were caught in a lurch, and their cash flow didn't work for about 3 months. And they pulled me aside, and we talked a little bit, and basically my business partner and I didn't get paid for 3 months and saved 7 people's jobs. Just because they weren't gonna get paid at all, and they were gonna have to start laying people off, which they were gonna need later. And it was just one of those things where we could afford to do it for a short period of time. And at the end of it, they made it right. You know, so if you're going to work contract, you shouldn't hope to do this, but if you need to, you might need to be flexible with some people, because you're probably more expensive than the people that are full-time as a contractor. You're going to be paid a little bit more because you're expected to get paid not just a normal monthly salary, but also they're paying for the start and stop of contract, right? I mean, contractors don't have steady pay, and so they're expected to get paid a little bit more, and at times you'll come in for a very short period of time, and that emergency, hey, you need me this week, I'll put everything else aside, you're gonna pay for it. And knowing that the 2 of us could be paid as much as 7 guys, it didn't hurt my heart, but it made me feel bad for them, and I wasn't gonna inflict that on them. So sometimes you have to be flexible, and that carries a lot of weight.
So the other thing I want to add is on the, to your point, where you talked about, you show you have a lawyer and all that stuff. For a lot of people, it makes no difference, right? So the number one thing you can do is start thinking about getting references on your clients, potential clients.
For sure.
Say, oh, can you tell me some other people who've contracted for you? And if there's a whole bunch of bluster around that, that's also one of those warning signs. Why would you need to know that? We're totally honest. Oh, well, your lips are moving. I get it.
Well, and if you have friends who are working for them, they may not feel comfortable saying negative things about a current client, but listen to the way they laugh about things. If they're laughing darkly about you know.
No, but it's really important, right? Because the worst place you can be is you're a month into something, and now you got zero, and you haven't been prospecting, and you're totally, and they just play the power card on you. Well, we're bigger than you, sue us. You know.
Well,
but now you can do mechanics lien against software and some other fun stuff that you can play with, but you don't really want to be in that game because it's not a winning game, but it's a good kick 'em in the nads game.
Well, and one thing I like to do is actually maintain a mix of shorter and longer term contracts. So, you know, you may have a short term contract where the company does something stupid, but you've still got, you know, some other stuff you can kind of shift work over to, you know, if something else dries up all of a sudden.
Very cool.
Yeah, having a backup plan, I think, is
Always.
always thinking this could go away tomorrow, this could go away next week. What am I going to do in that case? Knowing there, even if you never have to deploy the plan, is useful.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah, but isn't it seductive when some big company comes in and wants to like get all of your capacity
Yeah,
forever?
oh yeah.
Yeah.
And overpay you for it?
all it takes is for them to one day say, "Yeah, we're done,"
Yeah.
and then you don't do that again.
Yeah.
But it is very tempting to do that. But that you were talking about the contract. That contract is your first real working relationship with a client, right? If you're having problems at the contract level, that's a big old red flag that there's going to be problems. Because that's when everybody's happy and everything is the best it's ever going to be on that project, right?
It's a
And
honeymoon.
You're trying to put that together for when it's bad. You've got some structure to talk about the badness and do something about it, if you can get leverage at all.
And if anybody ever says, well, we're nice people, don't you trust us? No.
No.
No, that's
I'm a nice person too, so what?
Several questions. I'll start with the easy one though. Healthcare, what is your option other than Obamacare that you guys have done?
That's your option.
That
Yeah.
is,
Yeah, the private market is your
that's what we do.
option.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
There's
healthcare is
there's
one of
no
the.
pooling type things that you guys
No.
are
I-
Healthcare is one of the downsides. Self-employment tax is another one you should be aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're an employee somewhere, they're paying into Social Security for you. If you're not, you pay self-employment tax because that's not being done by an employer. So that's another reason contractors have to make somewhat more.
Even if you're doing it as a company and you're not actually,
Well,
Well,
depends
if
on the
your
company.
company
Depends on the size of
sets
your-
up a payroll for you and you pay yourself a salary, then you will pay Social Security tax to yourself to
But if
take
you're a
care of
member of
that.
the company,
You're
then-
still
Yeah.
paying it, you
Yeah.
know, one way or another.
Yeah.
You should, you know, in most of this, I would recommend find a lawyer, get an accountant to talk about the taxes, and make sure you understand all that. Because you could be going great that first year squeaking by and then get hit with a big tax bill or fines or something.
And idiot, check your accountant. We had a bad accountant that gave us bad advice on something and cost us thousands of dollars because of that. So you may want to like get a second opinion on some things. If they're like, oh, you don't need to pay that tax yet, be like, no, let me double check that.
And in addition to healthcare, you've also got like business taxes, like not taxes, insurance, different insurance policies that sometimes the client will require. If you dig down through the agreement, you're going to have to carry so much liability. So those are some things that you need to account for in your expenses for the
So I'm gonna give you a little tip. So look at the employee services companies a lot because they do the payroll, they do a lot of the HR stuff, and they put you in a giant pool for insurance.
Do
So
they
we're-
own the company now, or?
Well, basically, they pay you, so, you know, I work for TriNet, as far as the IRS knows. I don't work for Hard and Craft. So, but I think the interesting thing, and you pay a pretty sizable fee. You know, the bigger you are, the less the fee you pay per person is. But the cool thing is that insurance alone might make it worthwhile to get thrown into a giant pool of tech workers. So, just look under employees, there's like 20 of them.
Yeah, you can
There are
also
10.
find places like that that will put together a benefits package, gym memberships and things like that, so you don't have to worry about that kind of detail. I've worked at places that did that. Another thing I should mention too, back before Obamacare was passed, we had one of our business partners actually had a pre-existing condition such that nobody would sell her individual health insurance
had
in
the same
Texas.
problem.
They just would not do it. But because I had this small company, I said, okay, I've been treating us all as contractors or founders getting dividends, so I didn't have to deal with Social Security taxes and payroll taxes and bullshit. I'm gonna go out and get an accountant, and these two people in the company are now salaried employees. They're, all the paperwork, all the taxes are being paid. And I went to an insurance company that sold group plans. I said, I would like a group plan. You had to have 75% or more of your employees. So you can't just pick all the sick ones and leave all the nice, young, healthy ones off. So I'm like, fine, I have 2 employees. I would like a group of 2. And if we hire a third one, I'll offer it to them. Several of us others, again, still working as contractors, but they didn't know. So they sold us a group package for 2 people whose health wasn't the greatest, but they didn't have this rule that said, oh, we're real fussy, pre-existing. They just, they charged us for 2 people, and we were able to get insurance that way. Now that we have Obamacare, for the moment, I wouldn't have had that problem. But at the time, that was the only way out to get this very valuable. I mean, she's our executive producer to get her insured.
But yeah,
Next question, and then I'm gonna get somebody.
So, do you guys generally have your staff as on-staff people that you're actually paying salary and then you subcontract them out? Or are you subcontracting independent contractors? And the second part of that is, so let's say you do get a contract, you said that you pay extra versus the client pays extra what they would to an on-site person who's on staff because of the startup and the start downtime and the uncertainty and all that. What kind of margin would you expect to make on your, if you're comfortable answering, what kind of margin would you expect to make based on what you're paying your current staff?
Whatever the market will bear.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, what is a reasonable margin to expect in the contracting business?
Well, I think it's a challenge, right? So you're thinking about those people, but really you've got to make, again, it's opportunity cost,
yeah.
right? So it's not unusual to be paying 50% over what you pay an employee.
If you look at what,
easily,
yeah, I mean,
maybe more.
You have to count what they're paying. So let's say, for example, 10,000 a month is what, or 8,000 or 10,000 or whatever you count as an engineering salary for on staff. That's not the full amount of what gets paid because they have to pay for the insurance, they have to pay for the office space, they have to pay for the equipment and all the other kinds of things that seem like they're not directly related per person, but all the overhead gets lumped into an individual.
All the benefits they're giving that person.
Right.
It's like 12,000 here in Austin.
Right. So if you count that, that's your starting point for what you should expect, and there will be more because you're a contractor. Hopefully, you're very seasoned. You're not just a person who works there day in and day out. You have real expertise. You have some specific ability to solve problems that they can't do internally. So you're bringing additional benefit, and they should pay for that. Now that number is really up to you to figure out. I charge different rates for different people I had on staff when I ran my studio.
I mean, is the ballpark 50% or is it 300%? I mean, where's the ballpark there?
So it determines how long the contract is too.
And
Yeah,
which
and-
kind of problem it is, right?
Yeah.
If it's very specialized knowledge, I mean, if you're debugging a graphics driver, how many people can do that? Versus,
Yeah.
are you just doing some gameplay for somebody? How many people can do that?
Well, and are they asking for anything that's going to be more stressful than another job too? Like you can charge it's not unreasonable to charge more for that. We charge more for on-site than off-site because of just the inconvenience of having to go into somebody's office.
We pretty much just eliminate the whole on-site sort of thing. We're trying to take whole projects on. Most of what we do is fixed cost projects, not time-based stuff. The only time we use a time-based is when we've got a client that doesn't quite know what they want, and so it's a defensive mechanism to say, all right, we're gonna charge you by the time. And so if your scope grows, that's fine, we've got it covered. We're not left holding back on that. But yeah, like the butts in seats sort of contracting stuff, that means we're starting to compete against, folks that we don't want to compete
Yeah.
against. So I'd rather bring in internal, you're getting the team as part of the deal
Yeah.
instead of individual developers, because that's just,
Well, and
It's too hard to
that's an
price out.
important point to make. That you should always think of if you're a contractor, you should always think of yourself as a company and not as a person. And when somebody is contracting you, they're not contracting you personally, they're contracting your company. And they have no right to demand an individual staff member at your company. There are very strict laws, there are guidelines in the law about what defines an employee and what defines a contractor. And you don't want to allow them to get all fuzzy on that stuff. They don't get to tell you, a number of things about how you're going to do your work.
They don't require key employee lists?
They could ask for that. I mean, that's kind of like marketing. You're like, hey, I have these people. But they don't get to say, no, I need Joe to do that. Joe's the only person who can do that. They don't have a right to tell you that. They can't even put that in the contract. I mean, they could put it there, but it's not binding because they aren't allowed to ask for that.
and we've had ones that want the ability to say, we would like you to replace this person because there's a problem, but they've never done
But
that.
then they're making a complaint about your services,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
they're asking for an adjustment in services. I think that's a little bit different
Yeah.
from
Yeah, I will say, at Mobile Game Doctor, Dave generally goes to clients and say, look, you need a really complex math model. Kat's my math model guy. If you need like game levels or game economy, sometimes he subcontracts to Ben over there. And he's a small shop. He was a one-man outfit, but he subcontracts to some of his many contracts in the industry. He's been 20, 25 years in the industry, been at some really big companies. So part of what he's offering them is saying, look, I'm going to get you the best. You need a good slots guy. You need a good match 3 guy. You need something Dave's an expert at. He'll do it. So, you can offer them that, although technically he can. And, we've switched stuff out. Sometimes when I'm a little busy, I'll subcontract some of my work to Ben, with them knowing what's going on. I don't like to keep secrets from anyone. As far as, how much you charge, we've had different relationships depending on the client. One of the things Dave likes to go for a while, he was trying to get himself up to like 4 clients on retainer. And he would say, you get up to 20 hours a month for this flat rate. And then if you need additional hours, I'll go up to 25 for no extra charge if you have some extra needs that month. After 25, it's like $125, $150 an hour, whatever it was. He got me one of those clients for a few months. He's had a number on retainer like that. And the way his deal is structured, if they say, oh, we didn't need any help on the product this month, then he still gets paid. So he's got a nice steady income stream. We've had a lot of clients where it's just, something like $125 to $200 an hour for however much work gets done. And again, there's no risk there. If there's scope creep or unexpected difficulties, you're not suddenly working so hard you're making McDonald's pay. We're just taking on one now. It's my first one through Dave. It's just a $20K flat fee for the work I'm going to do on this project. And Dave said, are you okay with this? I'm like, make sure the scope is clearly defined.
Yep.
So if they need more work, I'm fine with it. But I want them to say, oh, you did the 20K of work. We need this. How much more is that going to cost? I don't want it. I mean, I dealt with that at Origin. And again, I'm embarrassed to say how little Origin paid people sometimes in the 1980s. But I was
legendary.
Yeah. They
are infamous.
Richard Garriott, Lord British, asked me once. They decided at some point, they had a mix of freelancers and salary people. They decided, well, we've decided we like salary now. We want to bring everyone in salary. And everyone was but me. And Richard said, I don't get it, Kat. Why don't you want to come in on salary? I'm like, well, I'm making $3,000 a month, and that's more than you pay any other programmer, and I don't want a pay cut. They had never paid anyone else that high. John Miles was the highest one on salary. He was like $30,000 a year, And so he came back a little later. He said, oh, if we paid you $36,000 as a salary so you didn't have to take a pay cut, would you come on salary after Ultima 6 is done? Sure. then I finished Ultima 6. They said, well, since you've been working as a writer and not as a programmer, writers only get paid $24,000. I said, see ya. But yeah, I did a port. I had done as I said, my first port in 3 months was Mobius. And then Greg Malone did the sequel called Windwalker, and I'm porting that one to the Commodore, but he's not done with the game yet. So I can't even finish till he finishes. I poured everything he had, and it's dragging on, and he has like no money to live on. He's like stealing cereal from other people out of the break room at Origin to survive. And he'd tell Dallas, oh, they're gonna shut something off. They're like, well, is it something you need like electricity, or is it just a phone? Oh, okay, here's just enough for them to not shut off the electricity, and you'll only be 1 month behind. Here you go. So, that one stretched out like 2 months beyond what it was meant to be when I negotiated a flat rate for it. And I was just on the hook for living 5 months instead of 3, whatever it was, on that same pay. So things got pretty thin. So, you got to look out for that.
We also do a mix of sometimes flat rate and sometimes hourly. What I like most about hourly is when somebody's bugging you and you're in the middle of something else, you can be like, all right, I'm running the meter. We can talk. They want to crunch you. Oh, that's adorable. Hang on, let me clock in.
I think my lawyer loves it when I ask him a question in email. He's like, haha, 15 minutes.
The flat rates, you just have to be so careful about defining the scope. You have to be really, really religious about it, and like, this is exactly what you are paying for, and this is what you're going to get, because they will try to feature creep on you.
Well, and then sticking to that as well, and saying, we always have, here's the stuff that we're going to do.
Stop being a nice person. Yes.
And then there's a rate for additional stuff, and to always clarify, all right, yes, we can do that. That falls into the additional support category.
And that's totally the way to do it too. You do a 2-part where it's like, this is the lump sum, and if you need additional things, it's going to be at this rate. That's exactly it.
And because that's when everybody's nice and friendly, that's where you're going to get the best agreement on it. And then when it comes time to it, it's a simple economic decision on their part to say, all right, if I want this, we already have it negotiated what it's going to cost. I can calculate it out. It's really easy. So I can't express more forcefully to get that stuff up front as much as possible. There's probably this tendency to be really vague about it, but you're going to have to be very specific eventually about what you have delivered, because someone's got to sign off on it. And it's a whole lot easier to have those discussions up front than later on.
You had a question there. I'm waiting patiently.
Yeah, but it's been several subjects ago. But it was back with the insurance and setting some of that stuff up. The IGDA has, as a member, you're supposed to have insurance through that. Anyone use that? What's your thoughts on that? Another hack that I heard was that you take a class at the ACC and then you can get educational pricing on your insurance. If there's anyone done that or any other creative insurance policies, but it sounds like we've
I can answer your first question. When I first went independent, I looked into the IGA's offerings. I contacted them. What they really had was, they didn't have insurance. What they had was a consultant that could suggest individual health insurance plans, and would give you, you're like, well, let's try this one, and you can try to get it. And I was denied by all of them. So it wasn't like group insurance or anything like that. There was nothing like that at all.
So it's not a group IGDA then?
No.
I think it changed since then.
You think so?
How long ago was
I don't think so. This was probably, I want to say it was probably like 6 or 7 years ago. But, I don't see any reason they wouldn't now just refer people to the ACA marketplace.
I did it about 4 years ago, and I was on an insurance plan that they had set me up when I was in college, actually. And the insurance plan covered my son being born, so I mean, it was decent insurance. I mean, it wasn't
right, but that doesn't. But what they were, everything that they were hooking people up with was just an individual insurance plan.
Yeah,
it was stuff you could have found any other way. It was not group insurance.
To help you, really, I guess.
Group insurance is very different from individual insurance in a number of ways. but it was individual insurance, and because I have migraines, was denied individual insurance by everybody. It was the stupidest reason to be denied, but, you know, because I wasn't even taking migraine medicine or anything.
I think it was like a Cobra plan or something like that was what they had us on, so it was not.
So Cobra you normally get from a former employer. That would be unusual.
So the reason that group plans matter or mattered, I don't know if they still do, is that you never could be denied insurance because the group itself had insurance and you were just added to the group. And individual plans, they can look at your individual medical history.
Yeah.
That went away with the ACA.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's coming back, but that's something you should look into the ACA. You should look into what your options are and talk to a person who does this for a living to find you medical plans if you plan to go out on your own, because you do want to have some kind of coverage. There are lots of different grades, and for the first 2 or 3 years, I had catastrophic only insurance, which meant if something happened, like I broke an arm, I could go to the doctor and I wouldn't pay more than $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000, whatever the deductible was. But there was no like copay or prescriptions or anything like that. But it was only like $60 a month back then. So you could calculate how sick you like to be versus, and you don't want to get into a car wreck, right? So that's why you have to have at least catastrophic. But if you're in very good health and you don't have a lot of doctor visits, then you can consider maybe looking at some of those. ACA still has some lower end plans like that, but most of them are the typical PPO, HMO, copay style plans, and those are a bit more expensive. You just need to look at your budget and see what you can afford.
Other questions about contracting? Finn?
When you're trying to get somebody that's definitely a rock star, you know you want them, but maybe you have a situation where you need to contract them, either with it's money or whether you're just kind of wondering, though this person's a rock star, but how are they going to work with my team? What are some of your views on how to basically entice them to come on without offering them an immediate salary?
I haven't crunched in 4 years. That helps. We're down south, so anybody living down south, you don't have to drive the corridors north. That's an advantage. The other thing is to not get into a situation where I'm desperate for somebody. And I think another thing is at Microsoft, hiring was like the full-time slots were gold. You were like almost hiring for life, and not necessarily the way it was, but that was the mentality. Was if I'm going to spend a full-time slot on somebody, I expect them to be here for a long time. So growing the company by bringing someone on is really looking for that ideal fit, someone that absolutely fits there, and that's not something you're going to get in a crisis mode. It's something that you're planning for long term. Hey, I know this person would be a great fit for the studio. What are they doing right now? Make sure that they know we're still here. When the time comes, make sure they know we're available and what our advantages are. And if it's the right alignment, it'll happen. If not, we haven't been built specifically to require that sort of thing. But I don't know, that may not apply to everybody.
I've seen really great programmers join a team, and they've been great at other places, and they join a team and they didn't step into the role quite as well at other studios. And then I see it as like that would be a benefit if the studio would have only had them in contract, but they're kind of obligated now because of the track record of that.
It's kind of a double-edged sword though, right? If you're not fully committed to them and you're paying them extra as a contractor, and then you go, hey, I want to make you an offer now to be a full-time person, and I'm going to pay you less.
Yeah.
You know, we really want you now, so we want to pay you less. That's awesome, right? It's very challenging, but again, the team fit is always a big challenge, a part of the hiring process. I think a lot of people are not mentally made up to be contractors, and if you try to force them into that, they really don't know how to act.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
One of the questions I wanted to ask these guys is, how do you hire people for your team? But I don't know that that's that useful to the rest of you, right? Because that's a challenge, right? You're hiring for a different kind of skill set potentially than you would for a normal team where I've got a role. I know that role is going to last a while. Here, it's like, I need a switch hitter. I need somebody who can play every position, and I can,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they can,
I want to kind of answer that question from both sides. You know, if you are lucky enough to not be like a lone wolf contractor, but you're building a small developer or a team of contractors or any kind of game company, and you know, this applies outside the game industry too. I read while I was out in Silicon Valley, putting in my 6 or 7 years, you know, learning that shark bit. I read this really good article, you know, what's the best benefit you can offer really good employees to attract them and to retain them once you've got them. It turns out the best benefit you can have for that is the opportunity to work with other really good, really talented people. So, you know, if you are or can be a rock star, be a rock star. When you're building your initial team, get the best people you can. If you have somebody that's not cutting it, don't keep them around, because they'll drag the team down. You know, your rock stars will be demoralized. You know, keep a meritocracy and an atmosphere of excellence, and then when you're trying to attract that next excellent person, they'll say, wow, it's great to be here. I mean, there's a lot of places I've been at, you know, 3 to 12 months in 35 years. I was at Origin 5 years because Origin had a lot of great talented people. They weren't paying me great. You know, I could say that now. I tried to shut up about it at the time because maybe my next place won't be saying, oh, we can underpay you like Origin did. You know, that's what you're used to. But yeah, they weren't paying me great, but nobody paid great in the 80s. And they had the best group of people, so it was good to be there. From the other side, I'd say, you know, whether you want to be a rock star contractor or whether you're looking and saying, hey, is this guy really going to fit my team though? You know, if you get somebody that's been contracting for years and has a track record of success, as opposed to somebody left a AAA company yesterday and wants to start contracting now, who knows what he's going to do, right? But if somebody's been at it and you can get good references, to me, a rock star is not just someone who's good at the work, but they're good at not having a big ego. They're good at adapting the team, saying, well, what does this team need? How can I meet those needs? You know, and good contractors will have that attitude. And if you find somebody, again, that's got a track record of success as a contractor, chances are good. But, you know, employers can do the same. We say, check out the people you want to work for. If you're going to hire a contractor, check out some of their past clients. Say, how'd this guy work out? Or, you know, friends you know that have worked with them. You can generally get an idea who's flexible and who's got a big ego. And I could mention a few names, but I won't.
Just 2 quick things to add. Part of why you're running into that problem is because, and this is going to be blasphemous, rockstar programmers are kind of overrated. They tend to only be selectively useful when they're working on things they're really excited about. The rest of the time they get bored and they just don't perform anywhere near as well. But at the same time, you know, the other problem you're going to run into there is a lot of contractors, like if you find them when they're a contractor, a lot of contractors just don't want to be full-time employees. So if you find a contractor who's like that, who's actually performing well for you, they probably aren't going to want to come on full-time.
Yeah, that's what we call the pool, right? It's the surge pool. When we have a little bit, we have a very, very short-term need. There's a group of people that I know just aren't interested in full-time, but I know what they can do. I know how well they would fit with the team. If there's enough of them, if there's some work that's available, we give it off to them. They do their thing. They enjoy it. They leave, and we don't have to grow to accommodate that short-term need.
Yeah, I have yet to find a full-time employer that's comfortable including pajamas in the dress code.
you just haven't looked long enough. You're working. Yes, ma'am. We're almost done.
Well, my company, Dragon's Eye Productions, that's, we allow
You
it.
had to start your own company.
Yeah.
When you're first getting started, how do you go about estimating what you're capable of taking on?
Good question.
Poorly.
Guess. No, I was going to say, you did it in fewer words. I would say guess and fail.
Yeah, I mean, the best position to be in is if you have years, you know, as a salaried employee doing the same work.
Yeah,
then
it
you have
helps
something to use as a yardstick.
Yeah, it helps if you start off with something that's similar to what you were just doing. So you kind of have a feel for how much time that stuff's going to take.
If you can manage not to swing a fixed price deal in your first gig, it's better for you, because if you miss badly, they keep paying you unless they say we're out of money.
That's a great
It
point.
happens, but I think it's important to understand most programmers are optimistic about what they can get done and actually fail to even achieve their expectations. So always build a little bit of a buffer into what you think, well, what's gonna happen, what's likely to happen, what's almost certainly gonna happen, and build those in as models when you start forecasting and say, okay, it's gonna take 10 months to do this if nothing goes wrong. What's gonna go wrong? 20%, 30%, something like that. It helps.
How many people here are not programmers? I should have done this at the beginning. So everything they're talking about is applicable to any other kind of work that's contract work, by the way. There's nothing really special about programming, other than it's hard, but guess what? All the other stuff that gets done is hard too.
Everybody's job.
Right? Everybody's job's hard. There's no easy jobs in game development.
I will say,
that I found, other than management, which is why.
yeah, programming is one of the higher variance jobs, though. You know, if you're composing music or doing writing, there's going to be, you know, estimates you make that are off, but they're rarely going to be off by as much. You know, a common thing in programming is, you know, the programmer gives their estimate to their producer, who immediately multiplies it by 2, tells it to the executive producer, who multiplies it by 2 again. And then, you know, the veteran programmer had multiplied his initial estimate by 2, so now it's times 8 instead of times 4, and he actually makes it.
So in other
That's
words,
the
we all
benefit of
suck at our
experience.
job.
Now, the good thing about programming is there's a lot of demand in programming for contract work.
Yeah.
Although it's not something that people always think of outsourcing immediately. They're going to think of outsourcing things like music. And so that's why you'll run into a lot of audio freelancers out there. But yeah, when they need programmers, they need programmers. And I've had a lot of times where I've turned someone, people will come to me trying to hire me, and I'm like, I'm not unemployed. But I'll be like, hey, but we could do some contracting hours for you. and we end up getting contracts that way, so.
Yes, sir.
So, as somebody, like, I'm not in the games industry for my day job. I do mobile development contracting, like, kind of moonlighting. I'd like to move into, I've done a couple little indie games here and there. What would be your recommendations to kind of get started and move towards, like, building, like you said, the track record of excellence? Like, somebody coming to you guys looking, you know, to be a subcontractor or something like that, what would you be looking for? And, like, do you have any resources or things you'd recommend to, like, start to build up that portfolio?
I find it difficult to convince a full-time game company that they should hire a non-game contractor.
Yeah.
Not because you're not good enough, but because you're not proven.
Right.
And most of what you bring as value to the table as a contractor is your track record. So that's the hardest thing to do, is to jump industries without having worked as an employee somewhere.
Yeah.
So, does a track record of, like, personal indie, like, games, would that be something that would be?
Yeah, that's helpful. The number one thing, again, number one route into the industry in this day and age is get a job at a game company and work as a salaried employee for a while, and then may branch out in other possibilities.
I mean,
The second best thing you can do, and you know, back in the 80s, you were hiring people with a computer science degree, or people who had done one game. You know, there wasn't much experience out there. So there were two kinds of people that came to Oregon. There were people, here's my bachelor's degree in computer science, the ink's still drying on it, you know, please interview me. And then there were the people, here's my bachelor's degree, and here's 3 games I made in my spare time. They're not published, but they're games, you can play them, you can see them. And those people always got preference. You know, it may not be enough on its own, but you know, people want to hire
Shows your
someone
passion.
they're passionate about games, exactly so, and it can't not be making games. You know, we prefer that to people who are like, oh yeah, programming for an insurance company was fun. I want to do 5 years of making games now, and then I'll go to some auto company. You know, that's not as ideal.
I hire primarily junior people when I hire. I don't hire often, but I do on occasion, and interns. What I'm looking for most of all in those cases, and again, it's super rare to find somebody who hires junior folks like that, like into a contracting situation like ours. But the biggest thing I'm looking for is somebody who's going to skill up fast. I think of my employees as being like my RPG team. You know, they're my squad. I'm taking them in. I want them to level up. And so I'm teaching them. I am giving them knowledge. You know, I'm feeding them. But that needs to stick. They got to show that they're somebody that's going to be able to absorb that like a sponge and level up for me.
That's exactly. I didn't mention it before. That's part of our reason to exist is to help people level up, give people an entry point into the industry. So when we hire, with the very rare exception, it's entry level folks, because it keeps us fresh, prevents the grumpy dude in the office syndrome, and I think we've got a lot of fun stories to tell. I know I'm still talking to you. I'm still looking at you, Sean. It helps keep Sean from getting grumpy because he's my office mate and I don't like listening to it. And it keeps things fresh, and I think we have a lot to earn, and I know a lot to offer to someone who's willing to learn. So in that respect, the ability to take direction, the coming in with an attitude of like, we have things to teach you, is really important. And with the full expectation is you'll level up, you'll go someplace else, and there will be someone else to come along. And I think we can keep doing that for years, as long as people are making games, then we can continue to help them and help people get into the industry.
So let me tell you what the definition of a contractor is, because once upon a time I read Ken Williams' bio, and he said, you know, he was doing contracting work before he started Sierra Online, and his definition of a contractor is I'm actually 2 chapters ahead of my employer in the manual of whatever I've been contracted to do. So he would take the manual home at night, read 2 chapters ahead of where anybody else was for who he was working for to be a contractor. So that's all. You have to be just smarter than your employer. That's all to be a successful contractor. John, back there, and then this gentleman here.
Okay. So this is just for me to understand what it is you're talking about. I'm interested in the amount of time you spend on something particular, which is hustling for work and managing the relationship with your clients. Dr. Cat had talked about how he's got to buddy basically agents for him and give the clients sometimes, but it sounds like the rest of you are basically saying, build up your reputation, get it however possible, and then the clients will find you. Is that correct? Or is there a time when you're spending time without any work that you want to do?
So generally, I wouldn't describe that as a successful marketing strategy for most things. Certainly not your game. If you build it, they are not going to come. But for contracting, it really is all about the community you've built up. It's about your network. It's about who you know. It's about knowing other contractors who, as we talked about earlier, can give you spillover work. It's about knowing people who want you to work on their jobs. You know, and again, like I said, they might come looking for you as an employee, and you're like, no, I don't do that. But that's, you know, another way to get contracts. The people will. I honestly never had to go looking for contracts, and I feel kind of guilty about that because I feel like I wish I had more advice to give to people who are in a situation where they have had to go looking for contracts, or who might not be doing programming and aren't getting as much demand for their labor. But I just haven't had to go looking. I've had about, you know, when one ends, there always seems to be one that just pops up right about then.
That's been our experience as well. I tried to I feel a little guilty about not doing it more, but the more I thought about it, the more it was the sales pitch is to be the best people that your client has ever hired, so that they'll recommend you to other people and they will bring you on board again. And then to pick clients that are going to be around to bring you on board again. I think that's the best advertising. You know, it's still advertising. Do a great job, and I think you'll have clients.
Yeah, your best marketing spiel is you have repeat customers.
Yeah.
Right. If they're going to bring you on once and then they do it again, you must have done something right.
Yeah, the I don't have to look for work is kind of the end game you want to try and build towards. But you know, I spent a lot of time. You know, you're working on project A, and you know, you spend a little time each week emailing people, you know, trying to get project B or C, you know, bait some hooks and dip them in the water, ask if they need stuff, and keep building up your contacts too. I mean, right when Origin offered me that 33% pay cut, I immediately called somebody I knew on the phone, and I had some work the next day because I know a lot of people. And that's helpful. But you know, even even if you're working and you know, okay, I got 3 months left on this and I don't know what I'm doing next. You know, you want to talk to your current client about whether they have anything else to do. That's your best possibility, and that often works out. And you want to be building up your contacts and asking people, hey, you know, do you have any projects coming up this summer, this fall? I'm going to be available again in 3 months. You know, and just keep, you know, talking around. You go to GDC, you know, you get on message forums, you talk to your old friends, you say, hey, you know, have you got, especially contractors who are too busy, you know, do you have any extra clients you haven't had time for, or you want to refer me there? You need to keep, again, until you reach that point where you're as lucky as many of our panelists are, where you don't need to look. That's unusual. Most people are spending some amount of time hustling every month trying to get that next
I
that next
chose
lead.
poorly for our panel. I chose people who are too successful. No, but the truth is that most people are in a consulting business like this, you know, where you're trying to do that, are spending 10 to 20% of their time all the time prospecting. And prospecting is not just prospecting, it's networking.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
So
Going
they're
to things like
basically
this.
expanding their network of people. They're trying to understand the businesses that might hire them and cultivating contacts at those businesses. Because it's all random timing. You know, people start a project and they wake up and they go, oh yeah, we started this project, but we don't have the people to do it. You know, we fell in love with something. So you have to be continually prospecting if you're in a service business. And to think about spending somewhere between 10 and 20% of your time, like a day a week on nothing, but that's not how you do it. You do a couple hours a day. Like in the first thing in the morning, let's do all the emails, let's think about who I need to talk to, let's set up a system to tickle the people that I talked to 3 months ago, again, a tickler system to wake you up and go, oh yeah, I talked to this person 3 months ago, it's time for me to touch base. Because if you're not touching base with them, I guarantee you they forget about you. Right?
Yeah, you
And
should-
if they have a problem around the time that you tickle them, they're more likely to wake up and go, oh yeah, that's a solution for me. This gentleman's next.
So say that you guys had an independent developer that wanted to do some contracting for them. What is the minimum dollar value of a fixed cost project for your company?
That's a good question.
$1 million.
You know, we've done really short projects, like here is a proposal for a theme park thing, and someone needs to do a technical review of it, right? And it was a, 8-hour read and write a report sort of thing that I don't remember what the dollar value of that was. It was pretty high because it was short term, right? Because the shorter term ones tend to be higher to make them worthwhile.
Yeah, it's we're really small, so it's easy to fit something small. But the problem is it's real hard to get the contract paperwork done on a really small project, like in a reasonable amount of time and without it becoming more expensive than the project. A lot of times we'll just do a quick boilerplate if we're trying to do like occasionally we'll have somebody come to us with an emergency weekend project or something like that. Like, oh my goodness, we need this done by Monday. Can you fit this in? And it's like, well, how much are you paying? And so for those small things, a lot of times they're going to end up costing more just because it's discrete and separate from any larger contract. It's hard to give an exact number though. Like I don't think I'm going to work on anything that's going to be less than a day, for example.
Well, it depends on how hungry you are, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if the contractor is a solo person and they have plenty of hours, there is no price that you can put because they're going to have to bump somebody in order to fit it in. If you're kind of hungry and you've got some downtime, then it really depends on, can you push a few things a little bit, a day or two here or there, fit you in, and make it work. When I was first starting out, the cheapest thing I did was the $30,000 project I got screwed on. I didn't know it was going to be $30K. At the end, when we were 7 people and I had 5 other contractors that I was subcontracting, it's a lot to manage. Just the amount of stuff that I had going on, I wouldn't take a project for less than 100K. It just wasn't worth it because I couldn't even look at it. And at the end of it, there was just too much going on, and my attention was so expensive that just setting up the project and fitting it into our existing schedule wasn't worth it. So I was looking at people that were floating 250K to multiple millions or whatever I could get, And we didn't land any of those bigger projects, mind you, but that's what I was looking at. So I think it depends on the scope of the contractor itself and how much attention they can afford you.
Yeah, the mobile game doctor is, on the smaller end. And I've been at big game companies that had a management bandwidth problem too, where, they could have done more games, done more things, but they just didn't have enough managers. They had the money, but they wouldn't bring on more developers or start one more game team until they hired another manager or two, because they knew they had a problem there. And if that's the case, you don't want to take a bunch of small contracts. We're very small, and again, our principals, me and Dave, do a lot of the consulting ourselves. He's not sitting there managing people. He's mostly making games. Occasionally, he'll farm something out to me or one of his few other buddies. He does stuff too, but he started me out with the contract. I know slot machine game design really well, both real slots and mobile and Facebook, make-believe slots. And so this company in England that wanted to make their first slot, they'd done poker and blackjack apps that were making money, said, well, we want to get a designer to help us with this, so you can just start us out with a paper of best practices. And so Dave bid, he said, okay, we'll give you 10 hours of writing on this, or I don't know if he told them 10 hours. He told me 10 hours, $2,000. And I spent about 20 on it because I really wanted to write it. I wanted to have it. We might turn it into a white paper to sell to other people. And if we don't, when I make my own damn slots game that I'm going to keep all the royalties on, I'm going to look back at my paper. What was it I told myself I should do? But yeah, that was a $2,000 project, and that was fine for me. What Dave likes to do is say, okay, if there's a short-term engagement or it's, unpredictable hours also, he likes to charge the client $200 and then he'll give me $150 and keep his chunk of it. If there's something where someone says, look, we want 20 hours a week for the next 2 months, he's like, oh, for a long-term predictable engagement, I'll contract you guys at $150 an hour because it's more steady. I'm giving you a volume discount, whatever. So that's kind of his parameters there. But yeah, how small a thing, again, we're doing a fixed one at 20K. For my share, Dave's got himself and a third designer on the overall thing. My piece is 20K for a longer term project. How small a thing we would take just depends on how busy we are. If someone came to us tomorrow with another 2K job, I'd say, sorry, I've got 2 half-time clients for the next few months. I'm booked up. Maybe later. If I was fairly open and I wanted a little more money to fix something around the house, it's sure.
Or you were interested in the work.
Yeah. Again, the slots I love. If somebody wanted me to do 2 hours for $500 and I wasn't busy and it was fun work, sure. If I'm not busy but it's like pain in the ass work for 2 hours, I might think twice about it.
And sometimes you take the small ones just because they may lead to more work.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and again, that slots client became my first retainer client, where again, for months after that, I was up to 20 hours a month for my retainer fee, but some months he didn't have that much work for me, and that was a good arrangement. And he launched his slots app last month, and I just sent him, I gave him a freebie hour and gave him a little advice on something that needed fixing this week. But hope it does okay.
Burns, please.
Yeah, what have your experiences been with offshore competition?
Usually we get to clean up after them.
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked that question.
That's the stereotype, but there are a large number of cases where that isn't the case, and so I was just curious if you've had any other.
Most people don't know how to manage overseas contracts.
Yeah.
It's the real challenge.
I have never been afraid of offshore competition at all. And part of that is all the people I've spoken to who've been in a situation, like there was one case, I can think of one instance ever where I bid on a contract and I got underbid by an offshore group. It wasn't a contract I wanted anyway. It was kind of one of those, well, I'll do it because I know this guy, but, and And he had nothing good to say about the team he ended up stuck with. It wasn't his choice. He would have preferred to go with us, but his higher-ups wanted the cheaper labor. He had nothing good to say about it, that experience.
Yeah, generally there's going to be two market segments. The people who are very, shall we say, price sensitive, like my Scottish boss had a couple of Indian contractors and one in some Eastern European country who messed up a lot of stuff. The Indians did pretty decent work. But people who want it cheap are going to go overseas. People who want it good are going to come to people like you see here. So we're not really competing to a large extent for the same clients.
Yeah.
Second question. When you, sorry,
No,
earlier
you're
you
not.
said that you really like people who can learn.
Yeah.
You know? And so, like, as an aspiring, like, professional game programmer, how can you tell that in a person aside from just their attitude?
Sometimes you can tell it just through a conversation. Sometimes I can sit and teach somebody something and see what they can do with that information I just gave them. There are a lot of, I mean, there's no like set in stone way, this is how I assess blah blah, you know, whether this person's going to be able to pick something up. Yeah, it's one of those things you kind of have to feel out. Although sometimes you can tell just from some, like, what has this person done so far.
I think you can't really tell when it's going to work, but you can definitely tell when it's not going to work.
Yeah, I was hiring an intern once. I was scouting interns, and I went in to see everybody's games because I went to a university, and these kids in this program were all showing me the games they were working on. And I had a bunch of people, kids come in, and they're showing me the project. I'm like, okay, what part of this did you work on? And they'd be like, oh, I this little bit over here, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, well, who did this over here? That was Amanda. And then, like, the next person comes in, they're like, I'm like, what did you do? I did this thing over here. And what about this? That was Amanda. And so I'm like, well, where's Amanda? I want to talk to Amanda. And so I finally get Amanda in there, and I sit her down, and she's like, I'm like, oh, you've got reflective water in there. And she tells me how the projection matrix for the reflective water works. And I'm like, and this was all, she didn't have to do that for her class. You know, because everybody else was getting through that class without caring about that or needing to know that extra level of knowledge. She was curious and had gone out and learned to do that because she wanted to have reflective water in her game. And that kind of curiosity, that kind of excitement for the knowledge is just like this big glowing beam of awesome, you know, like, I want her.
Well, the other indicating factor there is that Amanda was not standing out in front saying, I did this, and I did this, and I did this. Right?
Yeah.
She was happy with the part that she learned and the curiosity there, but not out with the attitude of like, I did all this stuff, right? You discovered it that way. And so if she had been out front, you may have had a different kind of takeaway from that conversation about it.
Yeah, and actually I hired a kid straight out of Trinity 2 months ago who he had gone to some extents to learn how to write code directly on GPUs because he wanted to simulate sand. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome, and I want you on my team. And the professor had no idea what he was doing. So I was like, yeah, you get your BS and CS and you're out of here, no problem, but can you tell us how it works? You know, those are the kind of kids you want.
2 pages ahead.
Yeah.
For sure. That's more like 2 books ahead.
I got kind of spoiled hiring for Dragon's Eye Productions. Over 20 years, we've had exactly one person who didn't come to us from initially being a player in our game, and that was a friend of mine who had worked with us at Origin, and she knows like every nerd in town. She's like the best connected person anywhere. But other than that, everybody had like come up mostly through the volunteer program in our game. And it's a user-created content game. So people are building levels and drawing art and doing scripting and making sound effects. And then you see somebody's really good at it, and you say, hey, let's talk to them about maybe, you know, having an expanded role. Maybe we'll make you one of the managers of one of the groups in the volunteer program. And then sometimes that leads to a hire, you know. But by that time, you know, we've had enough experience dealing and working with the person to know what their level of talent and you know, learning skills and enthusiasm is. So we're kind of cheating there, but you know,
I was thinking the word cheat.
Yes.
So all of you have massive amount of experience, number of years. When you get on with a client, obviously there are sometimes that you can answer a question, you can solve their problem in a very quick method. Do you find it's very often that they walk away with those answers without you? And how do you protect yourself from that? You know, how do you convert that free hour into a job?
Yeah, well, anything you can do in 5 minutes isn't where value is. You know, despite all the kids that come to you and say, hey, I've got an idea for your game. Can I make it with your company? And my idea is worth so much that you'll pay me on us. You know, what has value is something that takes 10 hours, 100 hours, 1,000 hours to do.
Yeah.
So, you know, if somebody gets some value out of, you know, my job interview at Google or whatever for an hour talking to me, enjoy, that was a free sample. You know, when Iguana wanted me to come in and program for a day to apply for a job at Iguana back in the 90s, I'm like, a day of programming, I get paid good money to do an entire day of programming. What's with you guys? If it takes you that long to tell that I'm worth hiring, maybe I don't want you. You know?
We take a bit of a risk every time we do a bid for a project. It's got the milestone layout, our technical plan about how we'd approach the project. We put some amount of time into it, knowing that, you know, an unscrupulous client could take that and give it to somebody else, and they could try to decode, you know, take the instruction, use it as a framework, and do that. I know that that's a risk.
But they'll screw it up.
No one has
99%
ever.
Yeah,
No one
yeah.
has ever done that. They look at this and say, "Oh my gosh, these folks put all of this effort into a bid compared to what I'm assuming are the other ones. Maybe we should hire these people."
Usually they're so hungry for the work time that they're not even remotely gonna walk away. They want the, you know, making is more important than ideas are in a lot of respects. You know, implementing, making it work. It's hard to understate how important it is to make things work. And if you're somebody that they think can make that thing work, that has a huge amount of value.
You only want clients that want things that work.
Yes.
And in fact, you only want clients that aren't getting 26 bids either. That's a big red flag. If a client is saying, oh yeah, I have a ton of other people bidding on this, you better get really sharp. That's the time to go, oh, I'm walking away. Oh no, I'm gonna pass on this one. You get back to me if you actually need it done.
Yeah, no, the best client is one that recognizes because of your particular experience and expertise, you're one of the best people they can get. And if you have a potential client where that is the case, but they don't recognize it, you're probably better off if they walk away and somebody better hires you anyway, you know?
Sometimes you have to actually fire your client after you've hired them. Like if you get a job you think is gonna work out and you start getting all these red flags, look for the out, because sometimes there is an exit that you need to take. You know, if they stop paying or they start pulling shenanigans like delaying your payments or changing what the milestone requirements are, or if they start demanding more people or things that aren't in the contract or whatever, you know, be very clear with them and restate the terms of the contract or binding, and if they don't seem to care, then you don't have to keep working there.
And your contract should let you do that, right? The moment that they pull something wrong, then you need to have the option to walk away cleanly. So it is past 9 o'clock. We're supposed to be out of here at 9 o'clock. First, thank our panelists for being here. And don't forget to grab a drink or a piece of pizza if there's any left before you leave. And thank you all for coming. We'll see you next month. What do you got?
On the front desk, if you parked in the garage, you wanna get one of these so you can pay $5 instead of 20 to get out.
Yes. Was that worth your time? I didn't get the call on your time.
Yeah, I guess my bio went out beforehand.
Surprisingly, all the stuff that you post on LinkedIn that's in my feed. So
okay.
I actually forwarded several of your job positions. Like
That makes sense.
Someone who had a lot of AI chops for a friend who works at Universal. Here you go, man. You're up there too, right?
No, you're definitely right.
Y'all working on that here in Austin.
Well, we're doing our best to try and have a success. So we can point to and say we should do something. I don't know, it's going to be a couple of years before we do that. The original one, Warren worked on it like, I'm not sure, it was done in Oregon last year. Second one was done in Yeah. There's some weird issues, like they have the trademark and they have the copyright, and so there's who owns what is a little up in the air, and you get to battle that out. Well, and the thing was, if you think back, it was actually more than 50%. You make sure that Liquid Virus owned the copyright and or something like that. Some public yard, and then eventually got bought by an insurance company, and then I came in. Let's just put it out. No, I'm not. We're doing everything here, but we do have some outsource. So our publishers are and they're offering to use some of their they're actually a pretty large operation. They're offering across the market. So we're going to be outsourcing to insourcing, I guess you call it. They're overseas. So they have an Indian company that does part outsourcing for a bunch of other companies. Okay. Also
Oh, it was like,
and we're going to come with them. We're ramping up a little bit. We're doing contracts. Yeah, at some point we're going to have more people on staff here in Austin. I don't know how many we're going to do
This is gonna sound weird, but there is a value to
Jonah Lowe. He's the guy who did like the characters Halloween and like he did like character artists for all the viral artists for probably. So it's very big. But I've talked to him since he was on LinkedIn. He told me that he was approached about doing the remakes. Yeah. I was like, hey, who's down here? Go on as an art lead or something like that.
Well, once you get big enough, but basically it's really easy to work on. One of the things I worked on at a local company was LinkedIn and so you get all the literally substance what they run. We did all of it. I never met him. He would show up. He would do his own thing. It was awesome, but he's an age.
I was like, you have a million puppets, and you're just flipping them on and off as you go.
I want to touch you up on that invitation to come. Where exactly are you guys?
We're in the domain.
The domain shopping center mixed use kind of.
Right across from where Whole Foods is. The building was a work on it.
Yeah, we work in San Francisco.
Okay, so it's probably sounds exactly the same. But if you just that'd be the easiest thing to work out around
Yeah, no, I'd love to come by and surprise Oregon sometime. I used to go, we had like a gaming marathon every Jerry Lewis telethon. I went to his house for that a couple of times after we were at Oregon. I need to get new Dragon's Eye cards. Mobile Game Doctor is what I need to give people. But Dragon's Eye, we have like a black card with silver foil stamped dragon cards by my partner on it. Yeah, like that was one of those. I could show people how pretty my card is. Yeah, yeah, I'll drop by and visit sometime. I always felt like, I played System Shock. I didn't really work on it, but I felt like, yeah, this is sci-fi Underworld. I'm kind of connected to this series since I worked on Underworld. Yeah, I figured. Yeah, I remember when Underworld came out, and, Carmack was doing Wolfenstein 3D, and he was Paul and Doug making a true 3D engine.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, you're an
Twist Tony,
experienced
you know,
programmer.
can't go like this.
Yeah, just a man.
So, I mean, they were both good, but Underworld was just so atmospheric, you know. Yeah, it was fun. There was a gathering of like the 25th anniversary of the fan club at Disneyland, and they had Richard as a guest and Dennis LeVay, and I was there. And this one lady who she's got like a master's degree in English literature with her thesis on Dracula. You know, she was telling me how her favorite thing was like the Tellurids in Underworld 2, and how she wrote the wiki pages on them. I was like, oh yeah, I went to your wiki pages last year. I forgot what I'd done on those, and I wrote all of that. She's like, you did? You know, and she was so happy. Yeah, it was fun time. Okay, well, I'll see you around sometime.
Just not like you can't get touch me already.
Yes, unfortunately, I can't really get into contracts because of some 3D modeling.
Literally a headache in my at the moment, I'm mostly having a decent day. Really lately, my fibromyalgia has been a bigger problem than my So it's my attitude. It's hard to see it, but if I lift my feet in there, yeah, right? Toenail. It's like, what is that under my toenail? Well, this is actually, this is years in that problem. It's been there for years. Well, it's been there long enough that I used to think it was my shoes that were causing it, and I don't wear shoes. Because I haven't been, so it goes back to before I was contracting. I mean, it was like I've got graphite in my phone.
Let me know when you're free.
Yeah. In college, yeah, I accidentally stabbed myself with
Yeah, so what I learned was you got a mental problem no matter what you're doing. That's awesome. That's awesome. See, you're very clear. And you can't be bad for the right amount of money.
That's right.
How much you paying?
I have Jason negotiate.
There is a price. For any kind of work. I think it's great.
I'm like, Jason, give them a number. That's right.
I think it's awesome. Yes, sir.
Have you met the 22nd century toys?
I don't think I have. I'm doing optimizations tonight.
Yeah.
bottle of water with arrow in my direction. My head was over my eyes, like, I'm not getting out of this. I'd like to